Namaste and a hearty welcome to Soft Talk. In this episode of the program, I'll be talking a bit about human rights and democracy. Recently, I happened to watch an edition of the Gravitas program that is aired through this WEON channel. The World is One network, that is, in which the presenter Palki Sharma was highlighting the plight of Uyghur Muslims, the minority Muslims in China. Sharma was shining light on how China was involved in the labor exploitation of Uyghurs to produce COVID 19 masks on an industrial scale, and how the Beijing regime was forcefully sterilizing Uyghur women. Sharma likened the repression of the Uyghurs to the German atrocities against the Jews around the Second World War. She noted that countries like the United States and Canada were standing against what she called the genocide of the Uyghurs, and that the United Kingdom was likely to follow the suit. The presenter took the occasion to point that India should also join forces with these countries against the Chinese atrocities. Indeed, injustice anywhere is a threat to peace and justice everywhere. And it is quite natural for the rest of the world to expect the country that takes pride in identifying itself as the world's largest democracy to stand up for human rights and democracy. Having said that, on several occasions, the largest democracy has provided tacit support to dictatorships at the expense of human rights and democracy. One such not so shining example is the Indian support for the eviction of more than 1 lakh Nepali speaking Bhutanese nationals. Note the numbers, more than 1 lakh Nepali speaking Bhutanese nationals from southern Bhutan in 1990s and the early 2000s. Remember, in that dastardly act of crime against humanity, the Thimphu regime used force, used rape as an instrument of war against a hapless humanity, tossed the houses of Nepali speaking Bhutanese nationals to drive them away from their homes. At that time, in those sad times, New Delhi, not only New Delhi, but the rest of the world, including the United Nations, the self styled champion of human rights and democracy, did not utter a word against this dastardly crime. Instead of making Thimphu stop this crime, India further pushed the evicted Bhutanese nationals who had gathered into Indian territories. Remember, Nepal and Bhutan do not have this land link. They are linked through Indian territories. That means any Bhutanese entering into Nepal uh, from Bhutan has to pass through Indian territories. So, what it did was like India pushed the Bhutanese nationals who had gathered, the evicted Bhutanese nationals who had gathered into her territories uh, into Nepal by using force. What a contribution to human rights and what a contribution to democracy. Obviously, the world's largest democracy played a huge role in making 1 lakh Bhutanese nationals stateless. Later on, the Thimphu regime declared the concept of gross national happiness, perhaps achieved after evicting the 1 lakh Lotsampas, the Nepali speaking Bhutanese nationals, and the United Nations came to her service. It endorsed, it supported that farce declaration, the gross national happiness, which I prefer to call gross national farce. The United Nations put its stamp of approval on that concept coming from a dictatorial regime that was involved in making 1 lakh people, more than 1 lakh people, stateless. New Delhi has no stellar record when it comes to protecting human rights of her own peoples, let alone that of uh, people living in other parts of the world. In the neighborhood, it often faces charges of muddying waters and changing regimes by using her stooges to pursue her interests in the name of democracy and human rights. So it is time for India to do a bit of so it is time for India to do a bit more of introspection, a bit more of soul searching if it really wants to protect human rights, if it really wants to contribute more to the protection of human rights, and if it wants to defend democracy furthermore. Mere Beijing bashing won't be enough. On this note, I wrap up this edition of Soft Talk. Uh, Please comment on my presentation, like and subscribe to my channel. My effort will always be on, it will always be towards winning your hearts and minds. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.